When Kelly Cochran's husband found out about her affair, he asked her a simple question that had unimaginably gruesome consequences. How would she make up for it? Jason Cochran was satisfied with the answer. He would forgive his wife of 13 years if she lured her lover to their house with the promise of sex, and he would take care of him. The small town of Iron River, Michigan, was a place where the past and the present seemed to blend together. Tucked away in the Upper Peninsula, it was a town where neighbors knew each other's names, where everyone was a friend, or at least pretended to be. It wasn't the kind of place that made the evening news, but it was a community where the simplest of changes would quickly stir the waters. People there trusted their neighbors, shared good news, bad news, and gossip with ease. But in 2014, something darker and far more sinister would unfold in this quiet town, changing its face forever. In the fall of 2014, the town was struck by the disappearance of Chris Regan, a man who had come to Iron River to start over. A former member of the Air Force, Chris had been recently divorced and moved to Michigan in search of a fresh start. His quiet demeanor and military background made him a respectable man in the eyes of many. He began working at a local factory and seemed to be settling into life in Iron River, until his sudden, unexplained disappearance. Chris was a kind soul, someone who easily formed connections. He was the type of man you'd invite for a drink after work, the kind you would trust without hesitation. But Chris had one thing in common with many people who walked into the Cochran's world. He didn't know how dangerous Kelly Cochran could be. Kelly Cochran was not a woman who immediately raised red flags. She was magnetic, full of charm, and had a way of making people feel like they were the center of attention. Those who met Kelly were captivated by her personality. She had a way of making fast friends, gaining the trust of everyone around her. Her warm smile and seemingly harmless demeanor hid a much darker side. Kelly was married to Jason Cochran, a quiet, brooding man who often let Kelly take the lead in their marriage. On the surface, their relationship appeared ordinary, even somewhat boring. However, the reality was far from simple. It was a marriage that had been forged in darkness. From the beginning, Kelly and Jason made a pact. One that would come to define their relationship and ultimately dictate the tragic course of events in Iron River. The pact was brutal and simple. If either one of them was unfaithful, the person with whom they strayed would die. The nature of this pact wasn't entirely clear, whether it was born out of a twisted sense of devotion or an ongoing series of betrayals. It solidified the darkness within the couple's relationship. And when Chris Regan came into the picture, Kelly's bond with Jason would be tested and broken in the most horrifying way. Chris Regan and Kelly Cochran met through mutual friends, and what began as a casual flirtation quickly turned into something more. For Chris, Kelly represented excitement and possibility. She seemed to understand his loneliness, and offered him something he hadn't had in years: connection. The affair at first felt innocent enough, but as Kelly grew more enamored with Chris, she also grew more reckless. It wasn't long before Jason became aware of the affair. The tension between him and Kelly grew, but he stayed in the background, watching silently as the affair played out. Jason's passive role in their marriage had always been part of the dynamic, but as Kelly's relationship with Chris deepened, it began to unravel. Kelly, perhaps sensing that her bond with Jason was on the verge of collapse, knew what she had to do. She couldn't lose control, not over Chris, and certainly not over Jason. In October of 2014, Kelly invited Chris to her and Jason's home. The night was supposed to be like the others, a casual meeting, a few drinks, some conversation. Chris, unaware of the deadly game he was walking into, arrived at the Cochran house. What transpired behind the closed doors would remain a mystery, but one thing is certain: Chris never left the house alive. Jason, who had silently stood by for months, pulled the trigger while Kelly distracted Chris. What exactly happened that night is still unclear. What led to the final decision to murder Chris is a question that might never be fully answered. But it was done, and Chris Regan was dead. The horror didn't end with Chris's death. After he was killed, his body was dismembered. Kelly and Jason, together, took the pieces of Chris's body into the surrounding woods, leaving them to be swallowed by the earth. But they didn't stop there. Kelly's twisted sense of control led her to another macabre detail that would shock the community. She later confessed that parts of Chris's body had been served at a neighborhood barbecue, a gathering that included close friends and neighbors. They ate the food, unaware that they were consuming human remains. This dark revelation would not come to light until much later, but when it did, it sent shockwaves through Iron River. The neighbors, who had trusted the Cochrans, were left horrified by what they had unknowingly participated in. The memory of that barbecue would be forever tainted by the horrific truth. For weeks after Chris's disappearance, there were no answers. His car was found abandoned near a remote trail, and inside it, a slip of paper with directions to Kelly and Jason's home. It seemed like an obvious clue, but when investigators arrived at the Cochran residence, Kelly greeted them with calm indifference. Her warm smile, her composed demeanor, she was convincing. Jason, in the background, stayed silent, adding nothing to the conversation. At first, the case stalled. The police had no concrete evidence to connect Kelly and Jason to Chris's disappearance, and the investigation seemed to lose momentum. As winter arrived and the town of Iron River was blanketed in snow, Chris's name faded from everyday conversation, but Kelly and Jason's lives continued, now shrouded in the darkness of their shared secret. By 2016, Kelly and Jason had relocated to Hobart, Indiana, leaving Iron River behind. But even in their new home, the tension between them was palpable. Jason had begun to unravel, his guilt, anger, and confusion pushing him to the brink. The couple's arguments grew louder and more frequent. Kelly, who had always controlled the relationship, found herself losing control. In February 2016, Jason was found dead in the home the couple had shared. Initially, it appeared to be a drug overdose, but the circumstances surrounding his death were suspicious. A syringe lay discarded near his body, and it seemed like Jason's struggles with pain medication had finally caught up to him. But when the autopsy results came back, the truth became undeniable. Jason had not overdosed. He had been smothered. Bruises and marks around his neck revealed a far more sinister end. At first, the authorities were unaware of the full extent of the Cochrans' crimes. Jason's death initially seemed like the tragic end of a man battling addiction, but with the discovery of Jason's cause of death, investigators began to re-examine his life and his involvement in Chris Regan's murder. The more they looked into the case, the more it became clear that Kelly was not just a victim of a broken marriage. She was a mastermind, and her ability to manipulate those around her was chilling. Detectives began to ask the hard questions. Kelly was no longer the grieving widow. She was now the prime suspect in 2 murders. Under increasing pressure, Kelly eventually broke her silence. What she revealed was horrifying. She admitted to luring Chris to his death, to being complicit in his murder, and to disposing of his body in the woods. The police followed her lead, eventually finding fragments of Chris's remains, and the horrifying truth was revealed. Kelly's confession didn't stop there. She spoke of her resentment toward Jason, how she had finally killed him out of revenge. Jason had taken Chris away from her, and in her twisted mind, she had evened the score by taking his life. The investigation then took an even darker turn as Kelly began to hint at other murders, victims whose names were never spoken. In 2017, Kelly Cochran was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Chris Regan. She was later convicted of Jason's death as well, receiving an additional 65 years for his murder. But even behind bars, Kelly's story didn't end. Investigators continued to search for evidence of other victims, some of whom may never be identified. Let me know, what do you think of this case and which you would like to see next? Till next time.